22-year-old Maria Anna Ballo had become close to the future godfather of one of her children. Maybe too close. An illicit friendship, this is how their relationship would have been known around town back in this time period. The target of Maria Anna's new affection was Nunzio Tabita, and he visited her house frequently in the lead up to the baptism ceremony where he would soon be named godfather. This was one of the few acceptable ways a married woman could interact with a man from outside the family. Under few circumstances could a married woman get to know a single man inside her conjugal home and be left completely alone while her husband was away at work. Here Nunzio and Maria delved deep into a friendship, first tentatively and then with more and more enthusiasm. What a bit of luck then when a few months later Maria's husband Cesare took to his bed sick. He was vomiting and unable to raise himself up. Maria described his illness. She said, "It upsets me to see him wasting away in his bed." She kept a vigil and served him faithfully homemade broth. Only a short time had passed from when he first fell sick to when he died, and an even shorter time passed when Maria was already married to Nunzio. Just a matter of days from the funeral to the wedding. The time and place was 18th century Sicily. Magic in la stregheria appeared to those in need and made its way through neighborhoods and families. In the case of the love triangle of Maria, Nunzio, and Cesare, what kind of Sicilian witchcraft was at work? How did everything work out so well for Maria, and would she ever be held accountable? This is the story of the Vinegar Sorceress. This is the story of Giovanna Bonanno. Hello and welcome to Italian True Crime. Giovanna Bonanno was born in Palermo, Sicily, sometime around the year 1710. She wasn't Italian, and this wasn't Italy. This was the Kingdom of Sicily, and Giovanna may easily have been a mix of various ethnic groups that had controlled Sicily for over 1,000 years. She may have been a mix of Phoenician, Greek, Vandal, Norman, and Spanish, just to name a few. Not that anyone really ever controlled Sicily. Even after merging with Italy finally in 1861, most Italians consider Sicily to be its own place with its own way of doing things. But in Giovanna's almost 80 years of life, she lived in a Sicily ruled first by the Spanish, who then lost control of Sicily to the House of Savoy at the end of the War of the Spanish Succession, followed by the Austrian Habsburgs, and then finally by the House of Bourbon, uniting Naples and Sicily. Sicily was frequently attacked, and in the period of Giovanna, the attackers were primarily Barbary pirates from North Africa. Everyone wanted a piece of this beautiful island right in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it was rarely just left alone. Palermo, where Giovanna lived her entire long life, is the capital of Sicily and a city over 2,700 years old. Some people call Palermo the most conquered city in the world, though, again, who really can ever control a city like Palermo or a people like the Sicilians? Born a poor beggar, Giovanna lived by her wits. Her quick ability to perceive and act helped her survive in a time where it was every man or every woman for himself. She had been married at some point, but soon enough she was a widow in a time when most weren't expected to make it to old age. In these societies from 200 years ago, there was at least a place for everyone, and even a poor old widowed beggar had a place. In a way, it was a revered situation. She was considered to be a witch, and though witches were sometimes burned, they could also be useful. She was devoted to magical practices, and people said that she fraternized with supernatural beings such as fairies and other witches. People visited her for magic and for charm, or to undo the effects of those of black magic when they considered themselves victims. When people looked for a witch or sorcerer for a special service, what they wanted was effectiveness. Giovanna's reputation, therefore, was based on the repeated success of her expertise. But early on as a witch, she had her ups and downs. Agata Dema, a 42-year-old Palermitana widow and bread seller, asked Giovanna for a potion to use against her son-in-law, Francesco Mistretta. He had a fairly good job. He was employed to carry urgent messages by the Prince of Trabia. His wife, Agata's daughter, had died 6 years previously, leaving him as the sole caretaker of his 4 children. However, instead of taking care of his kids, soon after his wife passed, he was in pursuit of a young maid employed in the same princely household. This meant Agata, the grandmother, was stuck looking after the 4 children. Today we might take the father to court, but back then the solutions were much sneakier and required a different use of brain cells. Agatha the grandmother had the idea to transform this illicit friendship into aversion. Better yet, how could she make the maid die so as to bring the straying father back to his duty? Instead of visiting a lawyer, Agatha visited the local witch, one that seemed just right, old, widowed, and poor. Giovanna Bonanno advised her to sprinkle water of a plant bark, unsalted, on the corridors and hallways where the maid usually passed. However, the procedure did not work, and Agatha Dema came to complain that she had been cheated out of 8 turi. Turi was a type of gold coin used in Sicily at the time. So the spark water didn't give results. Giovanna needed to find something that actually worked. Otherwise, word would get out that she didn't possess any magic at all. Near the end of her life, most of Palermo would say that her magic was real, and anyone who turned to her ran no risk of throwing their money away. So how did she develop her magic to make her the witch of choice in Palermo? Her extraordinary success was the result of a casual discovery which she exploited with great intelligence, and which changed the course of her life. She had overheard a young child say that he had accidentally swallowed a lotion invented by a local chemist for killing fleas. The child's life was saved by forcing him to drink huge doses of olive oil. Giovanna realized that she might be able to use the mixture for other purposes and conducted an experiment on a stray dog by giving it bread soaked in the potion. In this way, she was able to verify the killing potential of the flea lotion, and just as importantly, she inspected the dead dog and found the absence of any recognized signs of poison. There was no blackening of the mucous membranes in the mouth, nor any fading of skin tone. She spread the news among her clients that she possessed a mysterious liquid which, when swallowed together with food, assured a rapid and inexplicable death. From then on, she offered it, at a price, to all those who came to her for concoctions and charms. The vinegar, as she called it, had no smell and tasted like water. You could mix it undetectably with food and drink, as well as with the commoner remedies which doctors gave to sick people. Its astounding characteristic was its proven efficacy. Giovanna demonstrated her faith in it by asking the purchasers to pay her only the price of acquiring the potion, leaving the final compensation until business had been concluded to the full satisfaction of the client. Giovanna thus initiated a series of crimes in which women were the chief protagonists. She got old women to promote her vinegar. Young women would go to them to obtain the means for a readjustment of their personal status through the death of a husband. And this brings us back to Maria Annaballo. According to Maria, her husband Cesare was a deadbeat. He had a job, but he spent all of his money in the taverns, leaving Maria herself to scrounge for money and food to feed her children. This account was debatable. Cesare's friends and family didn't exactly see it this way, but this is the picture that Maria painted. One day while Cesare was at work, Nunzio had paid a visit. They must have calculated that Cesare would be gone for many hours, as Nunzio even stayed over, sleeping with Maria in her conjugal bed. Cesare may have had a premonition and came home early to find his wife and best friend in bed together. There was fighting and words thrown about, but here the helpful neighbors intervened. They even persuaded Cesare to return to his wife and speak to her. Cesare came back to Maria, who said to him, "Don't have nasty thoughts. Do you know what happened? Nunzio Tabita had been in a fight. The police arrived and he came to hide here." Cesare returned to the neighbors in whom he had been confiding and told them, "Next time I shall cut her head off and hang it from the window of our house." Her neighbors tried to reassure her that Cesare was a good-natured man and that she wouldn't have to worry. This was just a normal reaction. But with one of the neighbors, Maria found the word she preferred. "If only there was a great devil who could bewitch my husband and make him die," Maria dared to say out loud. But by now she had found the neighbor with the desired answer. "Watch out, those people trick you, they don't know anything," the neighbor said. "But I know a person who possesses a sort of water which is proved to make the people who take it vomit and die slowly without anybody knowing the cause, not even the doctors in the tribunal. And if some doctor wants to see the vomit, you can even let him see it, but he won't understand what had happened," explained the neighbor. Maria asked her neighbor how much this magic water cost. She was in luck. The neighbor knew all about the manner of procurement. She said it would be 6 turi for 3 flasks and a further 3 once of gold for a present upon completion. The once, or oncia, was a gold coin from the territories of the Spanish Empire, and it was worth about 30 turi. But even though her neighbor was helping her in the nefarious task of getting rid of her husband, she still wanted to be a good and helpful neighbor, warning Maria to be careful. For now she actually had a husband, and she knew the good and the bad of her current husband Cesare. Sure, he had his faults, but he was still relatively stable compared to other husbands around town. With Nunzio, the neighbor warned, Maria didn't know what type of husband he might be, and even more than that, she couldn't be sure he would want to marry her when all was said and done. But the neighbor kept up her end of the bargain, and within days had brought together Maria with the witch Giovanna. Giovanna had a flask of vinegar, as she called it, ready, tested, and proved. It was miracle water, and if Maria didn't have the money ready herself, she could simply ask her lover to chip in the money necessary to ensure she had enough vinegar to bump off her husband. Nunzio liked the idea and was happy to pitch in, but he balked at the idea of the cost. He gave the minimum and told Maria now it was time for her to do her part. The neighbor acted as the go-between and went as far as to explain to Maria how to serve the vinegar, to mix it with water and lemon juice or with broth. Maria started by giving Cesare a glass of vinegar mixed with water and lemon juice, chilled, after a long day's work. Cesare soon began to feel ill, having stomach pains and vomiting. Maria was a vigilant wife by his bedside and soon called in the doctor. The doctor ordered his patient to take brodo sciocco, which was broth given to invalids and still popular today among Italians, who are concerned about their current digestive state. Maria happily mixed in the tasteless vinegar from her flask, but she was running out. Nunzio, in the meantime, paid his good friend Cesare a visit at his sickbed, and after seeing how successful this sorcerer's vinegar was, he gave an additional 3 turi to Maria to make sure she didn't run out. The vinegar's magic takes place over a period of 8 to 15 days, allowing the victim one last chance to see loved ones and say his final farewells. It also allowed plenty of time to procure a priest for the last rites, allowing the giver of the vinegar to feel less guilt. Last rites were really the most important thing, and when people could die at any moment, if anything, the vinegar was a blessing, was one of the arguments from Giovanna and her crew of helpers. But this also meant the beneficiary, we will call her here, had to watch her victim waste away before her eyes. Some may have been cold-hearted, maybe due to how they'd been treated at the hands of their victim, or maybe due to the attitude towards life and death at the time. But Maria was starting to have second thoughts. Maybe Cesare wasn't that bad after all, and here she was letting him suffer, knowing she alone had caused this and she alone could stop it. She put a stop to the order of the new flask from the neighbor. Maria said, "I don't want to give him any more of this water because it upsets me to see him puking and wasting away in his bed." But the neighbor didn't want to hear anything of the sort. She replied, "What a stupid cow you are. If you don't give him more now, he will stay alive but will be an invalid forever." This was probably scarier to Maria than any of the other options, and so she did as she was told. On August 21st, 1788, her husband died, after having received last rites and saying a final goodbye to friends and family that had come to visit him. The week following Cesare's death was mostly made up of haggling and bartering over the final payment, which was supposed to be 3 once, but Nunzio managed to come up with only 1, and he added part of a piece of cloth, which must have had at least some value. On September 8th, 2 weeks after the death of her husband, Maria was officially married to Nunzio. Emanuela Lo Piccolo was a 51-year-old wife and mother living in Palermo in the same time period as Maria. She was relatively well off as her husband owned a well-known bakery in town. One day a visitor arrived. He had moved to Sicily from Naples, 2 different worlds at that time. His name was Don Giuseppe Molinari, and he befriended Emanuela and her husband. The man became a regular visitor, and Emanuela confided to a friend that she loved him and would send him food with notes to ensure he came to visit her at the bakery. She loaned him small sums of money, and he loyally came daily to see her. Her husband's son-in-law and son soon started to suspect she was giving the Napolitano money, and they forbade him to come to the bakery. However, the couple continued to meet secretly at his house and maintain the relationship against a background of continuous family disputes. Emanuela had heard people talking about the witch's vinegar. Through her maidservant, she procured a flask and administered it to her husband, the unfortunate baker. He died after 12 days. She immediately went to her Napolitano lover and told him that she felt herself victimized by her son-in-law, who accused her of wanting to remarry. But her lover was unmoved and replied in effect that she had no need to remarry at all. This was not the answer that Emanuela had been hoping for. In fact, maybe she should have spoken with her lover ahead of time before she went and killed her husband. She then tried to trick him by telling him that a stocking maker wanted to marry her. This too did not go as she had hoped. Instead of begging her to stay with him and marry him and to forsake any other, the Napolitano encouraged her to accept the other offer. Emanuela then played her last card. As she said in her confession, "After several days I took 110 onze in gold coins, and again I went to Molinari to tell him that I wanted to be married. I put this grand amount of money into his hands. He quickly agreed and married me as soon as possible." Overwhelmingly, Giovanna's clients were women, But men had needs too, and would seek out the services of the Vinegar Sorceress often in the same way, through an intermediary who was familiar with Giovanna and her work, usually an older woman who had the ear of the neighborhood. 56-year-old Rosa Bilotta was among the Vinegar Witch's clients. She was from Palermo and a madame by profession, who declared that she procured womanly pleasures. One of the men that frequented the Madame Rosa was a nearby baker by the name of Giuseppe d'Ancona. One day at Rosa's home of womanly pleasures, he met Dorotea and Maria Anna Zuccaro, a mother and daughter. The baker was very taken by the young girl, who was only 14 years old, and he declared that he wanted to establish an illicit friendship with her in exchange for her maintenance. But the girl's mother was organizing her marriage to a cook who had promised to marry her, and she decisively refused Giuseppe d'Ancona's offer. An actual marriage was far better than maintenance, and so the mother was ostensibly looking out for her daughter's future. Giuseppe by now was so taken with the 14-year-old that he was willing to entertain the requirements of the mother. He was married, however. Luckily, Rosa was familiar with ways to free oneself of a spouse, and during one of the baker's meals, he told the two women he was going ahead with the procurement of the miraculous vinegar. He was therefore ready to promise marriage to the young girl. The two women's resistance was quickly overcome by the generous offer of 10 gold once to the mother, who then consented to the relationship. So this was a marriage or a quasi-marriage, which was aimed at securing Maria Anna's maintenance. She would marry the baker, and her mother Dorotea, who organized it and managed it, would also be supported. It must have been the worst-kept secret, that of the Vinegar Sorceress and her magic water. But it was still illegal, so why did it take so long to arrest Giovanna Bonanno? Or maybe the question is, why was she ever arrested at all? Most people probably accepted her work as either real and true sorcery that they had probably better just leave alone and hope no one turns it against them, or as an acceptable response to women's place in society, a backlash allowing the female persuasion to have some choice and liberty in their difficult lifetime. In the end, Giovanna was betrayed by one of her delivery women, Maria Pitara. Ironically, this was probably the height of Giovanna's professional poisoner career, after sputtering as a witch. When Maria was delivering a few bottles of poisonous vinegar one day, she realized that the victim was the son of a friend, and she decided to warn the mother. The mother was furious and laid a trap for Giovanna. In 1788, Giovanna Bonanno was arrested and faced conviction for witchcraft. She was executed by hanging on July 30th, 1789. Her trial resulted in 1,500 pages of court documents. Other mostly women were arrested, such as Maria Anna Ballo, and were required to testify against Giovanna at her trial. It's not clear how many people Giovanna may have murdered, but her predecessor, the more famous Giuliana Tofana and her Acqua Tofana, also lived in Palermo and operated the same program between 1633 and 1651. She had confessed to poisoning 600 men. She was executed at only 31 years old, while our Giovanna made it to 79. Magic represented the commonest remedy for problems which were otherwise unresolvable. It was the easiest to make available and the least class-bound. It was precisely trust in magic which made murdering a husband a reasonable undertaking. The need for an arcane remedy to resolve family disputes made poison naturally acceptable. These women did not see themselves as murderesses, and they expressed no fear of being discovered, no sense of guilt, and did not even seem to feel any necessity to justify their actions by referring to the sins of the victims. People turned to magic because they wanted to do something about the negative aspects of their lives. In some cases, marriages had been made more difficult by precarious economic conditions, and marriage was the axis of a woman's identity. Without the mix of magic and support from family and neighbors, women were truly without freedom. The examples of 18th-century women using the poisonous vinegar were more frivolous than the majority of the cases and are probably not a good representation. Often women were escaping an abusive marriage in the only way they could imagine was possible. Giovanna was not far from the truth when she said that her sorcery was without sin because it was used to remove discord from families and to replace it with peace. Thank you for listening to Italian True Crime, the English-speaking podcast for Italophiles. I recently listened to Bailey Sarian's video about Giuliana Tofana, and this inspired me to learn more about these women known as husband killers. Both Giuliana Tofana and Giovanna Bonanno came out of Palermo only 100 years apart, and between them must have thinned out the population. Luckily, today we have the possibility of divorce and freedom to change and improve our station in life without resorting to poison.